So we'll get started in just a minute or two. If you take your seats and round up your friends. I'd like to thank the faithful for staying for the last session. I won't give a big spoiler alert, but we have 4 excellent talks lined up for you to wrap up your day. And I'm not being facetious, I'm the last person, so spoiler alert. In organizing the workshop, we put a lot of thought into the structure, and what you see over the course of the day is we started with a very big picture vision with speakers from the higher Emory administration and from Gary Gibbons giving why this is all important. As we've moved through the day, you start to see, unlike hopefully applied research talks where you say, oh, we could do all this if people got together, you can see the kind of things that are happening as people are getting together. This last session is starting to think about, okay, what are some connections here on campus for growing that next generation through training, but also promoting junior faculty and junior researchers, and what other kinds of development activities are going on around the university. So we've got representatives from our math and computer science program, from biomedical informatics, from nursing, and from public health, addressing some different issues along this way, because as the Think Big Symposium becomes a series, we want to be thinking about how we're growing this, how we're making this happen, and how this is helping out the broader research agenda here at Emory. So our first speaker is Professor Vaidi Sundaram, who's the current chair of the Department of Math and Computer Science, was also a leader of the Computational Life Science Initiative that was part of the strategic plan a few years ago, and has been deeply involved in a lot of big data science development around campus. Vaidi and I are leading an academic learning community this fall at Emory on identifying data science activities at Emory. There should be a call for participation coming out soon, pretty soon. We'd be meeting several times during the fall semester, so if you find this of interest, be sure to keep an eye out for that. So, Vaidi?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Lance, and let me repeat Lance's thank you to the audience, or what's left of the audience, for staying behind to this last session. As one of the speakers in the last session, I guess I'm obliged to stay for the last talk of the last session, which I will. Really looking forward to it. But thank you also to the organizers for the opportunity to present here. My talk, such as it is going to be unique in a couple of ways. First of all, I'm the only person in this entire lineup of speakers who's not from the health sciences or not related to the health sciences in some way. But that is actually a telling indicator of what's happening in the field. Mathematics and computer science, as you know, is permeating every discipline for the better of all those disciplines. And healthcare is no exception. So, as you probably know, biology has transformed from a laboratory science to an information science. Healthcare is going the same way. Healthcare is going to be entirely driven, or maybe even operated by computer scientists and mathematicians, with due apologies to the MDs in this room. The second way this talk is going to be unique is it's not a talk at all, but more of a smattering of information about the faculty in my department and those we work closely with that are doing things in the realm of computer science and mathematics with particular focus on healthcare applications. So I thought that would be the most interesting thing for you. So this is all about the work that other people are doing. And I'm honored here actually to represent a little bit of glimpses into the kinds of work. And again, this is obviously a collaboration between mathematics and computer science and various aspects, various dimensions of healthcare and health sciences. And so that's, I guess, a set of case studies into what's possible. And if any of you have any interest in these or related kinds of collaborations, we'd welcome your input and your partnership. So with that, let me just start with by saying what I'm going to talk about. I'll just give you a glimpse of computing and data science in the Emory College of Arts and Sciences, which is where mathematics and computer science sits. And then I'll follow it up with a sampling of scholarly activities, particularly focusing on the collaborative research that we do with Woodruff Health Sciences. And of course, like President Sturck said this morning, the reason why we are all here at the university is because of our students. And education is a big part of what we do. So I'll talk a little bit about our interdisciplinary graduate programs that are probably of most interest to all of you. 1 minute of introduction. Computer science and mathematics at Emory is a joint department in the College of Arts and Sciences. And of course, as with actually with every department in the college, we have a threefold mission. We are very focused on undergraduate education, as focused as we are on research and on graduate education. In our department, we teach over 6,000 students a year, which is kind of large given the size of the college. You can imagine every student passing through our doors at some point in a year, although there's usually some who do so multiple times and some who do so once. Graduate courses, I'll talk a little bit more in detail, but this is actually a joint collaborative partnership between the School of Public Health, the Department of Biostatistics in particular, and the Department of BMI, Biomedical Informatics, and the School of Medicine, and us. So that is another interesting example and a unique example of what we're doing here at Emory in terms of joint collaborative education programs. And then, of course, our research. So let me start with a sampling of CS research projects. And just to give you a quick glimpse of what we do that's more or less foundational and not necessarily related to any particular application, let me start with what we're doing in high-end computing. High-end computing is something that we've had a fairly long tradition of doing in Emory. And essentially, the goal here is to, right now, for the next 3 to 5 years, the goal is to do what we call exascale computing. And that is kind of the holy grail in the scientific communities and so on. So we're developing software systems and software technologies and algorithms and new frameworks and new platforms to help us achieve that level of computing. And of course, fault tolerance is a big deal these days, so we're doing that too. And now, I guess for those of you who are not familiar with this history, maybe 20 years ago, computing was mostly about computing in the sense of number crunching. And now, of course, it's become data. But it's not that computing has gone away. We have to have big data, but we also have to have big computing to go hand in hand with the big data. And I'm just giving a quick summary of the PIs that are involved in this project. And I have a couple of this one is a busy slide, so I'm not going to talk very much about it. A couple of people here talked earlier about, the previous speaker actually talked about cloud computing. But one of the projects that we're doing is where's the button? Yeah. Typically, people these days have access to a whole variety of platforms. You have your desktop, your cluster computing, your campus computing, your cloud computing, and so on and so forth. And then you have programs. These are some particular cases of programming frameworks that we use. And so one of the projects we're doing is to map those automatically and transparently to the user to any platform that you might want to have access to. So the previous speaker pointed out the hazards and the difficulties of taking your application and moving it to the cloud. Well, if you have to switch back and forth, that's going to be even more complicated. So one of the projects we're working on is one of these kinds of mapping systems that make things much more transparent to handle. The other thing is, again, this business about moving big data back and forth to big computing or bringing big data to the big computing is a problem that's not going to go away. And there's always going to be fraught with various challenges about cost, efficiency, security, and so on. So one of the solutions, and this is actually a solution that Facebook has adopted or is adopting, is this business of caching. So, right? So the basic idea is that not all people need access to all the pictures that everybody has posted. So you're trying to predict and be a little bit creative about what pieces of the data, which individuals are going to need, and preemptively bring them into some kind of local storage, which we call a cache memory. right? So this is a project that's actually going on right now. And you can imagine this being applied to the genome studies issue. If you wanted to map genomes, you probably don't have to move the entire set of genomic data back and forth. You can probably do some kind of clever caching to accomplish those things. So that's another example of basic underlying fundamental computer science research. But like anything else, where there's big data involved, it can be applied. And in this particular context, it can be applied to the health systems, or healthcare, health science situation. Okay, now let me go to another project which has not been mentioned so far, and it's kind of surprising because at any data science conference should, in fact, be thinking very seriously about privacy and security issues. And so let me just tell you a little bit about privacy projects or privacy research that's going on in our department and how it relates to directly, much more directly, to what people are doing here. So as you probably know, there's privacy and security issues in health science in various contexts, and in particular in the context of the Precision Medicine Initiative. And there was a promise and a pledge by President Obama to protect patient privacy in everything that we do, right? So I think this is a very, very key point, which has not yet actually caught the full attention and the full implications among the people who are doing data science in the healthcare domain. Before I go forward, I just want to mention there's a big difference between security and privacy. Security is the idea of keeping data secure and preventing unauthorized access. Privacy is a concept of releasing the data without divulging any of the personal details. So basically, I want to know everything about you, but without knowing anything about you, right? So the solutions that our PI, Professor Zhang, is working on is how do you share data with guaranteed privacy? Now, some of you may think that, well, all you need to do is to de-identify the data, but of course that's not adequate at all, as various examples show. One of the studies, this is actually quite old, maybe 10 years old, showed that 87% of US residents can be identified uniquely by just this combination of zip code, birth date, and sex. And of course, if you associate it with one or two other pieces of information that you might know about the person, then you can know anything you want to know about them. In this particular context, you can know a lot about their health conditions, right? So de-identification does not guarantee privacy, and this is something that we should be aware of. In fact, another recent paper pointed out that HIPAA safeguards are really not adequate to prevent re-identification of data, right? So, in fact, there's yet another paper here that says for a very small amount of money, you can actually find out pretty much anything you need to know from HIPAA de-identified data about an individual. And it depends on the state you're in, because this has something to do with how much of the voter registry that the states release. But you can see it's not an expensive proposition at all, right? So if I knew how to think like a bad guy, I'd find all kinds of uses for this. So, and people probably are doing it, right? So this is just a case in point about the importance of privacy. Now, the thing that many people do is to use statistical data release as a proxy for individual data release. But that too doesn't guarantee privacy, as this very simple example shows. So for example, if you release histogram data about people who are afflicted with a certain condition, it's possible to add a record. So you have something about patients, ages, and some status of health condition. This is the histogram that you release. And if you add another patient, you can immediately tell by the change in the histogram and relating it to the released data that this particular person is afflicted. So one of the solutions that's being pursued as a very promising approach is this notion of what's called differential privacy. And differential privacy essentially perturbs any kind of statistical data release with some noise in such a way that the statistical properties are actually preserved very accurately, but the data is preserved in such a way that the addition or deletion of one record does not change those attributes, right? So this is the theory here, and so you can, I can walk through this example, but basically the idea is you do some perturbation, a certain kind of perturbation, or adding noise and so on, that changes the data in such a way that the addition or deletion and a revised statistic will not be able to tell that one person was added or not, and in fact, certainly will not be able to tell which person was added or deleted, right? So that's the notion of mathematical guarantee of privacy. And so this is the project that Dr. Zhang is doing. It's a PCORI-sponsored project. And essentially, she's doing various kinds of data release technologies that take patient data and sort of separate them into different kinds of release possibilities, right? So some people have paranoia about releasing the data, some people don't. And so you can have individual patient choices factored into how much data you want to release, and using those kinds of things. Say, for example, using both private and consented data, you can have statistical releases of data that are much more accurate and that represent the data set very, very precisely, right? So those are the kinds of examples of privacy-preserving data acquisition and data release that this project and our people in our department are doing. Moving on, I want to talk a little bit about phenotyping. This is by Professor Joyce Ho. Phenotyping, as you know, is a way of classification of anything, mostly human beings and patients in particular, into various kinds of groups. In fact, here's just a sort of overview picture of how phenotyping works. You have all kinds of data about individual patients, and you combine them and you aggregate them, and then you try to separate them out in order to find, say, similar characteristics, et cetera, right? So in fact, this morning, Dr. Gibbons pointed out that you might have a reason, for example, to identify metabolically healthy obese people who are resistant to diabetes and CVD. That's an example of a phenotype. Not a very common example, but that's something that struck me this morning as something that you might want to do, right? The normal way of doing this so far has been to have experts make up rules about what constitutes a phenotype, merge that set of rules with data from electronic health records that are processed using natural language processing, et cetera, and then evaluate it or visualize it and evaluate it for accuracy, and then iterate the process over and over again until you get some kind of accurate representation of a phenotype and accurate classification. Now, this, of course, is a time and labor and expert-intensive process. And so the new method, this is being pursued by Dr. Ho, is to use machine learning approaches to do this process automatically. This slide, let me just skip through the next slide. Basically, the idea is that you collect a set of data over time and aggregate it all, and these are multiple dimensions like diagnosis, medication, patient code, ICD-9 code, et cetera, et cetera. You aggregate all of this, and then we do this thing called tensor factorization, which is a very common technique in mathematics previously, but now is finding a lot of use in actually classifying patient records automatically, right? So this is a machine learning approach. This, as you can see, this picture really has no experts in it, right? So there's not a need for doctors to annotate it or verify it or evaluate it. The machine learning process actually uses this thing about tensor factorization to create different kinds of phenotypes. So that's another project that's going on in our department. This morning, Dr. Levy talked about Alzheimer's disease and how to detect Alzheimer's disease. Actually, he didn't talk about how to detect it, but he talked about the fact that it starts to appear, maybe 20 years before it is usually detected. And in fact, Dr. Levy himself was part of a project along with Stuart Zula and Professor Eugene Agerstein from our department, who worked on this fascinating project really to perform early detection of cognitive impairment, just based on the fact that people, when they look at web pages or computer screens, their eyes tend to move in a certain pattern, right? So what they did was to set up the system where you show two images to a person through a viewport with the rest of the image being blurred, and you show them two identical images, and then at some point you change one of the images and look for their reactions in their eyes, in their retinas, of how they move around these screens, right? And what they found was that a normal subject has a certain pattern of movement between the two images when the two images are exposed, but somebody with an impaired subject has an entirely different pattern, which, visually you can see this, and they have quantitative ways of actually discerning the difference between what is normal and what possibly could be impaired subjects, right? So this is a very cheap and quite effective method of detecting cognitive impairment very, very early on in the process. And so this is an example of a direct collaboration between a computer scientist and two neurologists, right? So this is case in point. This technology or this method or this discovery has actually been taken to the marketplace, and there's a company who's licensing this particular technology. The other area which big data is involved in is natural language processing. And one of the projects that one of our faculty members is working on with somebody in radiology is to do, automatic classification of radiology reports. This is just an example of what a convolutional neural network is. I just wanted to give you a quick idea of how this works. Basically, it's this process of recognizing things by doing what we call a neural network. I'm going to just go fast through these slides. The basic idea is to take some kind of pattern or input and to be able to tell what it is by passing it through what's called a neural network, right? So let me just get to the bottom slide. So what Professor Choi is doing with colleagues in radiology is to read by computer radiology reports, which are written in natural language, with English narrative, which of course, as we all know, has a large amount of subjectivity and a large amount of individual variation, stylistic factors, and so on, and use this to try and classify certain attributes about the particular patient that's embedded in the report. And so essentially what they did was to construct a convolutional neural network that uses this process and tries to classify the degree of accuracy or the existence of certain conditions given a radiology report. In this particular case, they were looking for how specific a radiology report was in articulating particular conditions in a patient based on the words and the language contained therein. And in this particular case, they took 5 conditions to look for, and this is the NLP, or the neural network version of how well the automatic computer-generated process matched a first doctor's interpretation and the conclusions, and this is the second doctor's interpretation and conclusions. So you can see here that automated methods to read a report from a radiologist are actually as good in terms of identifying particular conditions as a second physician might possibly be, right? So this is a very promising project in the area of big data that is being pursued. I want to switch a little bit and maybe give me 2 slides on talking about the mathematics and less about data and more about computation. And so, of course, as you can imagine, image processing involves a lot of mathematics and a lot of computation. And so this is an example of a project done by Professor Rutoto. The idea is to use something called EPI, echoplanar imaging MRI, which is actually very good for the patient, very good for various other reasons, simply because the scan time is a couple of orders of magnitude less than the scan time of typical MRIs. However, because of various factors, EPI MRI has artifacts or distortion. And so here's a reconstruction formed by mathematical methods. These are essentially what we call inverse problems. So there is a source and there's an image. You're not able to understand and know the source or what happens to the beams on the way to the image. You only know the image. And the problem, the mathematical problem, the inverse problem, is to find what happened during the process of transmitting from the source of the image through the patient onto the image. So that's an example of the kinds of numerical linear algebra, numerical methods that's going on. Another is in tomosynthesis in breast cancer imaging. This is the use of 2D images and scanning techniques to reconstruct 3D images. And this is another project that is going on. And let me sort of conclude with a scenario of what has been proposed and is almost actually happening in the practice of clinical medicine. And this is an illustration of a patient comes into the clinic and somebody takes a picture. This is a reconstruction from computed tomography. We digitize it and generate what's called a mesh. And then we use this mesh to simulate blood flow through a particular vessel and to determine if there is an aneurysm or the likelihood of an aneurysm. And this is, I guess, where the predictive medicine part comes in on a very, very micro level. And of course, once you do that, whether or not to place a stent, where to place a stent, and so on and so forth, right? So this is entire area of mathematics and computation, which is called computational fluid dynamics. And it's been going on for several decades, but mostly in the area of weather prediction and fluid flow and petroleum and discovery and so on. Now it's finding use and application in cardiovascular medicine, right? So this is an example of actual projects being done. And let me just tell you one bit about this thing about FFR. Fractional flow reserve is a measure of the pressure drop across an occlusion in a blood vessel. And the traditional way of measuring this is to insert a pressure sensor and measure the pressure before and after. Of course, that's an invasive process. A numerical calculation by taking an image according to the sort of schematic I had before can do this. The previous methods used to be very expensive because it would take a day and you probably couldn't make the patient wait that long. We have now high-performance computing techniques and algorithms to do this in less than 1 hour. Probably still not there yet, but you can see where this is going. Let me stop with telling you a little bit about our graduate programs. We have multiple graduate programs. The ones that are most important to you or us are computer science and informatics, PhD, and we have a biomedical informatics concentration. And we also have several master's concentrations with data science, biomedical informatics, and computational science. So this is truly interdisciplinary, and it's actually interdisciplinary in terms of how it's organized and administered and taught. It involves people from the School of Medicine, the School of Public Health, and Emory Math CS. And in addition to all of this, we have various other collaborations in terms of rotations across schools. And now we have a new School of Nursing partnership with Professors Corwin, Hertzberg, and Dunbar, and we in fact have a joint appointment with Math CS as well. Okay. Here's a listing of this. So let me conclude by saying, at Emory, these are just the academic programs. There's various other research labs, including human genetics and so on, that but these are the academic programs and academic research projects that are going on. Basic research in mathematical computation methods with many applications in health, and we're actually ramping up to do more. We have multiple partnerships with Woodruff Health Sciences, and I just want to conclude by saying data and computing are the future, so join us.
One quick question? Or a zero quicker question? Yeah. So thank you very much, Mike. Yeah. Okay, our next speaker is Ashish Sharma, coming from Department of Biomedical Informatics, and he's so excited about the cloud. He's actually, his presentation's on Google Drive, so just to show off what we can do.
Exactly.
But to get, moving from math, computer science, biomedical informatics, then we'll have representatives from nursing and public health.
Thanks, Lance. So, sort of picking up the theme on training, as Lance, I chatted to Lance and then Gary, the idea was sort of talk a little about what it takes to develop teams for data science, what is the training involved, and then touch upon some of the activities that are going on at Emory. So this will pick up a lot on the stuff that Reddy just covered. So I won't spend much time on this, but it's worth just sort of talking about what is big data. There are plenty of definitions out there. You've heard many of them. My personal favorite is the one from NIST, which is this formal one, or the more condensed version, which is it exceeds the capacity of whatever you can currently do. By extension, I was doing big data 10, 15 years ago. It exceeded the capacity of the massive machines I had access to. You were never working with small data. You've been working in big data. You will continue to work in big data. More importantly, what is data science? So harness the tools, the systems that are used to manage, gather, and collect this. They sort of make up the ecosystem of big data. The algorithms, the tools, the systems, as well as, and quite more importantly, the domain knowledge that is needed to make sense of it and use it in some setting, that, in my view, is what is data science. So data science is what turns big data into something actionable. Keeping up this theme of buzzwords, precision medicine. Yesterday, clinical care was symptom-based, develop intuition, best practices, and so on. Today tends to have this flavor of creating cohorts and what works on this cohort of shared traits. The notion of precision medicine is, I think Jim used the one that I like, which is the right treatment to the right patient the very first time. So not the right time, just the very first time. And that's made possible by data science. So through the ability to harness multiple varieties of data, whether it's personal profiles, environmental data, molecular imaging, and so on, how do you can sort of slice and dice and mash it up into a highly personalized profile and then figure out what's the right treatment and what's the right time, the first time, when that can be delivered to the patient. So who is a data scientist? What is a data scientist? This was a figure that somebody put up on their blog, but I absolutely love because it kind of captures the essence of the fact that data science is, for starters, a team sport. You cannot have a good single, I'm sure you can, but that's a unicorn. Data science is a team sport. You don't get experts in three, but likely a team member that can navigate across. So somebody is coming in with domain expertise, clinical, biomedical expertise, but can navigate the ecosystem of the software, the engineering, and the math and the statistics. And the training is all about how to equip them so they can ask the right and the novel questions, sort of the unknown unknowns. So a lot of the things that I think there was a question in the audience earlier this afternoon, which is how do you make this a lot more mainstream? I think a much harder question is how do you turn this into something that's interpretable? So the presentation that Gary was giving where you're talking about how a learning network is designed to predict when sepsis is occurring. The ideal scenario would be a big flashing red light flashes on the clinician's screen that says, act on this because I say so. The more likely is these are the risk factors, and the clinicians have to be able to sort of interpret that knowledge that's being delivered, that new form of information. So it's not that we are using EHRs to just write on pieces of LCDs, what we used to write on pieces of paper. It is we want to turn that into some actionable knowledge, and the interpretability of that actionable knowledge can only come if clinicians have an understanding of how that information was obtained. That trust can only be established if they can navigate the skill set on the engineering and the math and statistics side of things. So the current training environment, in my view, so I'm the co-director of graduate studies for the Math CS BMI track, and my own personal view, as well as sort of discussions we've had in the department, is they kind of tend to break down into these three groups. So you have the more traditional computer science, machine learning, applied MS, PhD programs that are a mix of engineering and maths for coming into machine learning or machine learning at large scales. Most domain-centric graduate programs tend to have a flavor of this, or you have people with domain expertise that out of need and necessity develop hacking skills and come up here, but there is just a lot of self-learning that goes in. So it's just whatever you happen to stumble into, things that you've come across in the field, but not a good way, coherent way to kind of bring all that together as a training activity. So how do I turn all of you into members of a data science team? From a training side, it includes some expertise which is in the areas of machine learning and cloud computing. These are the tools of today and time going forward. Rich, in his earlier talk, when you're talking about AWS, I'm using cloud computing, you're using cloud computing. Within a few years, once Epic or Cerner does its move, all your EHR stuff is going to live on the cloud. So might as well start using it in your research, because one way or the other, that's going to happen. How do you actually translate your research environment onto the cloud? How do you make use of computer systems that live on the cloud? The cloud is not just a glorified data center. There are a host of managed services out there that you can leverage that are more economical, that are much more powerful than what individual HPC labs could deliver in the past. And getting exposed to real-world problems, because in the end, getting your hands dirty and with these tools in real-world problems is the best way to do that learning. I'm not arguing that people become experts, but being able to appreciate how an algorithm comes to a certain decision or the challenges of running things at large scale, that's the training side of things. And then side by side, what happens is the communication, again, through exposure to real-world problems, being able to differentiate between hype and reality of tools, because this is a new field. You'll come across tools all the time that claim to do a lot but do hardly anything. And then being able to communicate with the specialists, not just on the tool and the math side, but for people who are coming in from the CS and the math sides, they need the ability to communicate with the domain specialists, the clinicians, the biomedical researchers. So if you sort of stick with this little M&M type of chart, at Emory, well, not Emory, but broadly, this is how these programs then tend to break. So the text in red sort of calls out some of the work that's ongoing at Emory. So the CS BMI, the CSI, Computational Science and Informatics, and the BMI specialization, as well as some of the courses that are offered in the program in areas of natural language processing, deep learning, high performance computing. They're all geared towards getting those students who are the hackers and the ML guys exposure to real world problems. And if you talk to the faculty here, a lot of our projects tend to have a very strong medical clinical focus. I mean, Veddy's talk covered most if not all the Math CS faculty, and every one of them is touching upon something in the biomedical or clinical domain. So by extension, class projects tend to flow in that area. Then you have, what about the experienced individual that's coming in, the MD, who wants to use these tools in their research activities? So this year, the Emory's CTS, say the math science, the Masters in Clinical Research, I and Mark Bronstein from Georgia Tech would be teaching a 1-credit big data course, sort of as a jumping point to something which was targeted more towards the experienced practitioner, introducing them to the field of big data and potentially expand that in years to come with elements of machine learning and so on. And then there's a lot of training opportunities available in BMI and other departments where faculty, postdocs can actually get exposure to real research, collaborate with people, and get there. What seems to be missing is sort of the short-term and graduate and executive programs for the experienced individuals, not necessarily faculty, but the Atlanta area is sort of unique because it has a high mix of industry as well as healthcare IT environment. How do you get them trained in this field? So that's something with the discussions that are ongoing. So, Biomedical Informatics Department. So we are a unit in the School of Medicine. We are a relatively young department. I think we are the youngest department in the School of Medicine. The department was established in 2011. It's a department with 8 faculty who have primary appointments in BMI, and then there are multiple faculties with primary appointments in other departments, but joint appointments in BMI. Our research portfolio spans critical care, mHealth, genomics, radiology, pathology, global health, neurology, and so on, and using a mix of all the tools of the trade: machine learning, signal processing, cloud computing, graphics, visualization, and so on. We collaborate across multiple departments of the School of Medicine. Most of these collaborations tend to have a pretty applied flavor to it, as well as biostats, MathCS, CHOA, CDC, Morehouse School of Medicine, UGA, and so on. Our education and training activities, I just want to spend minutes talking about it, is joint with MathCS and the Biostats department. This was established as a track in the CSI PhD program in 2012. We have a cohort of 18 PhD students, including a few that are going to start in the next few weeks. And the student coursework spans courses in computer science, offered by our department, as well as biostats and domain specialized courses. So the objective is PhD students who are coming through our program get a broad exposure to as the tools as well as the domain and get the mathematical foundation. So kind of try and cover all 3 elements of that Venn diagram. They have to do 2 research rotations. Research rotations are more like protected research time. So they get pretty deep into a research project with a faculty who over time could potentially become one of their co-supervisors. And again, research topics are topics covered part of the BMI faculty portfolio, but almost everything is application-centric. These are some of our recent graduates as well as some of our current students and postdocs. The reason I kind of just called out these 3 or 4 is, so Sanjay and Michael are our 2 recent graduates. Sanjay was our first PhD student. Michael actually graduated from the CSI track, but was supervised by a BMI faculty. Amin was my student. All 3 of them their job titles are data scientists. But what's interesting is while all 3 of them worked in the biomedical and healthcare domain, all 3 of them are applying the tricks they learned in medicine in areas of electronics and communication, inventory management, Zappos, and detecting internet threats and frauds. So the takeaway over here is the fact that you get exposed to problems in healthcare does not restrict you to healthcare. Healthcare is such a rich, diverse, and messy field that if you can cut it here, you can cut it almost anywhere else. Adriana is one of Gary's, being supervised by Gary. She actually has a PhD in biomedical engineering from USC, and she's an MD student here working in signal processing and ML. So she's kind of coming in as the hacker ML who wants to really pick up domain expertise. Then their current postdocs, again, coming in with EC backgrounds, but building up on biomedical applications. So a lot of the students, postdocs that are coming to our department, that are getting trained in our department, are coming in with backgrounds in engineering and computer science. So they're coming in with strong developmental skills, strong software development skills. Some have, others develop backgrounds in machine learning, deep learning, and so on. Every one of them has to be interdisciplinary. They have to be able to live the computer science and the applied field and be able to move between those two environments. They need to be able to speak two languages. That's the shared trait, in my view, of a data scientist, somebody who can span those three elements of the Venn diagram is a successful member of a data science team. So if you're building a data science team, that's the trait that you're looking for. If you're looking to develop that training, that's what you want to do. You want to be able to navigate those three circles. This is a project that Gary has joined with the Morehouse School of Medicine, where they're developing a large-scale mHealth program platform that's doing longitudinal second monitoring of behavior, exposure, and interfacing to healthcare. So talk to Gary if you're more interested in the research. From a training point of view, the thing is all the tooling that's being built is being built as open source software. If the users and the adopters can actually see the source, it helps build trust. This is a diverse population, so you are actually opening up a pretty diverse pool of people to coding skills, as well as issues around security, health literacy, etc. And then everything that's being built there is built as under a BSD license, which, for those of you who are not familiar with the BSD licensing, it is a pretty permissive license, so you can take these tools, commercialize them, start your startups. So some of the key takeaways are, within the US as well as globally, there is a big need for data scientists. Data scientists there's not a single person, there's somebody who can contribute to a team of data scientists. There's also a huge gap in opportunities. Some of the things that we are doing over here are trying to address these opportunities gap, as well as figure out what are those skill sets that we are positioned to satisfy. And there is a huge demand. An example of a demand is there's a huge pool of existing IT and engineering staff. That IT and engineering staff has to learn how to transition onto cloud environments if they want to be relevant 5, 10 years down the road. How do you actually retrain that group of people? Because they have all the technical skills, but their systems are still evolving. And you add data science skills into the mix, you've certainly increased their earning potential as well as their value to an organization by an order of magnitude. All of this because medical data should not be for billing. Medical data should not be for record keeping. Medical data needs to go in to drive research and predictive care, because unless it does that, that diagram that I showed early on about precision medicine, that'll be just yet another hype of a nice idea, but that was years ahead of its true potential. And Atlanta is sort of uniquely positioned for it, for reasons I mentioned earlier. We have a large industry presence. There's a unique mix of universities that are highly collaborative. And yeah, thanks.
Any questions? Okay, I'm transitioning the MC duties to Gary.
Okay, so I'll take over. I'm Gary Miller, the third Gary to take the stage today. I'm going to be introducing the last two speakers. So Dr. Vicki Hertzberg has been at Emory for many years, over 20 years. She has served as the chair of biostatistics and bioinformatics back when it was just the Department of Biostatistics. More recently, she's transitioned to a new role in the School of Nursing. So about 10 years ago, Emory School of Nursing was well known for its clinical care, but it really had no research portfolio. It is now the #1 ranked NIH-funded School of Nursing in the country. So they are now generating a lot of data. And so they created this new Center for Data Sciences, and Vicki is heading up that initiative. So it's really nice to have this presence of data science over here in the School of Nursing. And she also has her own personal research interest in network science, which fits in very nicely with what we've been talking about. And she's going to talk about the future and this training of the teams that we need in the future. So, Vicki?
So, thank you, Gary. I've had a long history of collaborating with nurses. I was about 4 to 6 weeks into my first job as an assistant professor in 1980, and this person showed up in my doorway. She was a very tall, blonde hair, spoke with a honeyed southern drawl. She was a colleague from the College of Nursing at the University of Cincinnati, and I know her today as Linda McCauley. So we've had a very long and productive friendship and relationship ever since then. After I moved to nursing, again about 2 or 3 months into that, there was a story on NPR one day about medical students at NYU that were working with big data. And we thought, well, if medical students at NYU can do it, why can't nursing doctoral students do this as well? And so that's what we set out to do. We proposed a course to the graduate school. We called it originally Big Data Analytics for Nursing Research. And Laney didn't like that. So we changed it to Big Data Analytics for Healthcare Research. And we offered it actually this past spring. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our experience there and do it in the context of the fact that for the most part, you've been here all day, and if you've been here all day, it's because you're part of the choir. And we need to be reaching beyond the choir to other people, as Dr. Sharma alluded to earlier, in terms of training people that are professional, they want to use these tools, and how do they go about it? And that is exactly what this course was about. So I'm going to start at the end right now. First of all, I want to give a big shout out to Melinda Higgins, who was my partner in crime in this, and it really was very much a partnership. And after the course was over, Melinda took this and she took several of their final projects and she put them together as a symposium that she proposed for the 2018 meeting of the Southern Nursing Research Society Symposium. So we have exercise frequency and location, potential associations with gut microbial diversity, one topic. Integrating worksite-based temperature sensor data with regional weather readings to establish improved heat risk warnings for Florida agricultural workers. Investigating longitudinal contraceptive use from the National Survey of Family Growth, results, lessons learned, and future directions. And then we had somebody who actually wasn't a nursing student and a sociology student interested in mental health issues, and he did a massive text mining piece of work on parenting bloggers and mining for mental health. Just to give you an idea of some of the things that they found, this is topic models that the sociology student, Craig, found. And these are different topics and then the words associated with them as he mined through these parenting blogs that he found online. I suspect that he spent most of the semester actually getting the text mining, the text scraping actually to work, but he's somewhere. And he's going to be able to turn this eventually into his dissertation research. This is from Alyssa on the right. This is not working. On the upper right. And she's looking at exercise frequency. And so we have from the gut microbiome, these are measures from the American Gut Project. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, the American Gut Project is a citizen science initiative. And for $99, you can ship off your poo to a lab, and they will tell you your microbiome. And then they will keep your data and make it freely available. And so she downloaded the American Gut Project microbiome data, and she's very interested in exercise, and does that have an effect on the microbiome? And looking at measures of microbiome diversity, there's two measures of diversity. The Shannon is the two lines on the left, the Simpson on the right, and she was able to show that there was increased diversity with exercise. Down here on the bottom left, this is Juliana, and looking at contraceptive utilization by year and being able to look at those changes over time. And then finally, my postdoc, Valerie, was looking at the data that we've accrued in the study we call a Hirasoli study, where we're getting core temperature readings, also microclimate readings from a badge that they wear. These are Florida agricultural farm workers. And then we also get readings from the Florida Agricultural Weather Network. And she was looking at how do you look at something, what's the relationship between what the gross climatological indicators are that would be freely available through the Florida network versus what might actually be happening at the individual worker level, and how to translate that. And she found that when you looked at the heat index, that you really were able to find certain objective measures that corresponded to breakpoints that you don't really need to be going around and wearing this little badge for. So she's turning that into paper. So we offered, this is Nursing 741 in the spring. We required that they either had completed or were simultaneously taking Biostatistics 501. And we met for 3 hours every Wednesday. We started off with 10 students. One was from sociology, and we had one postdoc from nursing. 8 female, 2 male, and we did lose one student. Now, I've lost students before, but this time I was encouraged because she just decided she wanted to return to clinical work, and it wasn't the course that drove her out. So, as we started to plan for this, we had a lot of decisions to make. Do we go with R or Python? You could debate it with me. We could still debate it. We decided on R. Because of the increased emphasis of the NIH on reproducible research, we started that from day one, from minute one. Because I think we all develop our own personal workflows so that we can reproduce some with greater success than others. But we really wanted to drive home these work habits into their workflow for this class from the very get-go. We used a combination of R, RStudio, Git, and GitHub to do this, as well as implement the other things that we were teaching, and we really worked on this workflow quite a bit. Just to give you an idea of what's happening, RStudio is an integrated development environment that allows you to run R and see a lot more about what's going on, rather than to have to push the buttons at the R interface itself. And then we were able to use R Markdown and knitr, which are R tools to provide dynamic documents. And then these all were able to link via Git and GitHub so that we were able to provide version control, among other things. So we had several objectives. This is this is all listed here, but I want to know that want you to come away with knowing that they were able to demonstrate knowledge about the tools of big data analysis, and how to go about incorporating these tools into their projects. And finally, we have here analyze ethical issues, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So we've covered a variety of topics, from what is data science, reproducible research, data wrangling, which we spent an enormous amount of time on, because that is actually what you do spend an enormous amount of time on in any kind of data science project. Exploratory data analysis, summary statistics, visualizations, got into linear models, logistic regression, prediction, working with text. We got into machine learning. These are not computer scientists, okay? And it's amazing how well they grasped it. We worked, because there is a large interest in the School of Nursing, we talked about the microbiome and how to analyze data from that. And we finished off with social network analysis. So we, along the way, invited a few other people in. We had Michelle Wright, our new faculty colleague, who had actually come from Yale, I think, from her postdoc, and had been incorporating R routinely and the reproducible principles into her workflow. Lisa Elon from the School of Public Health. All right.
You don't have any more pretty pictures anyway, right?
No, I don't have much in the way of pretty pictures. So in terms of challenges, if you are interested in doing something similar, the ecosystem of R Studio, Git, and GitHub is pretty fragile. Once you get it, it's a wonderful thing. But the minute that somebody upgrades something, you're doomed. And so my advice is get it working and stick with it and don't upgrade. Another challenge was finding really good examples of interest to students. We need to talk more about ethics. As Vidi pointed out, there's differences in privacy, confidentiality. We really need to talk about that. So, in conclusion, I want to say it is possible to teach these students who are not computer science students. They don't have a deep background in mathematics or statistics or computer science or informatics or whatever, and to bring them from nothing to those wonderful graphs that I showed earlier. And I think the secret is to get students doing powerful things quickly. They don't have to necessarily be able to program in R. They just need to be able to understand what we're doing and to then figure out where to change things to make it apply in a different case. We had a challenge in that we don't require laptops for our doctoral students, and our computer lab has disappeared this summer, and so we're going to have to find in the future another environment for this, and so we're probably going to have to explore some sort of virtual answer akin to the RSPH desktop. And we also need better examples. So in some of the textbooks, there were 2 that came available in January after we'd already started. And on at least one of those, about a third of the examples are related to either baseball or cars, which quite frankly doesn't go over all that well after the first time. And it doesn't even always succeed the first time. So we need to put more emphasis on getting health-focused examples. We have, in the same time, we've been acquiring what we call the Sender database, which is the Center for Nursing Data Health e-record, where we have obtained the records for 20,000 patients in Emory Healthcare. And those are all de-identified, and we're working now on tools to make those available to our students, not only in this class, but other students, our DMP program, et cetera. So I'd like to conclude by thanking the students of Nursing 741, Melinda, Matt, and Steve, who helped us with a lot of computing issues, the SON Gang of 4 that listened to this practice the other day, Stack Overflow and Dr. Google, which none of us could survive these days, as well as the organizers for inviting me. Thank you.
Any quick questions? I think one of the key things is like, how do we get this sort of information out to a broader audience and the sort of core courses that so many of our trainees need, and how do we kind of create something that, like that sort of how biostats went through, how did I get this training? But these are tools that all of our trainees need, and we need to get this out to more people. So I don't know how to do that.
I think that we need to, I don't know, we're really bad at Emory about kind of spreading these things across our silos. And the graduate school there should be some way of doing this. But, the Craig from sociology found us, I guess, by just browsing the course catalog online. But that's not such a readily accessible thing as it was in my day, when it really was thumbing through a paper document. So, but it will be available in the future.
Okay.
I'm not sure when, but it will be.
Got one more question. Andy?
Does the library keep track of who's doing what and how many times it ever?
Not that I'm aware of.
That would be a good project for the library.
Mm-hmm.
Have a database of data
Right.
available on
Well, there certainly should be an opportunity here to maybe try to get some of these things done after this meeting. Okay, let's move on to our last speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lance Waller, who will soon be another former chair of biostats and bioinformatics. And with all his spare time, he can take on some of these big data initiatives. So Lance has been chair for the last few years here, and he's, as you know, he's led many of the issues around biostats on campus. He also now co-leads our data sciences core of our Hercules P30 Center, so trying to think about all these different ways to bring all these together to solve these problems, and he's going to enlighten us here with the closing talk.
Well, special thanks to Vicki for her aplomb in the shutdown when we hit 4 o'clock. I guess there's an automatic shutdown in this room, which we have now learned, and we will try to have someone who knows it's coming in there, but you managed that very, very well, so thank you. So we've seen a lot of the things that are going on broadly at the NIH down to individual packages here. And what I'm going to talk about today is actually of interest to department chairs, research staff, faculty members, and it's if you think all this stuff is really cool and you want to do it because it's sort of out of the box, how do you get promoted when you're getting evaluated by people who are deep in the box? And this came around because the American Statistical Association has a department chairs workshop, and Jeff Leake from Johns Hopkins, who's one of the leaders of their Coursera data science certificate, was talking to the chairs about what data science was all about, and he was an assistant professor at the time. He's since been promoted, and one of the he said, well, I'm worried about getting promoted, but actually I just want to do the stuff I want to do. And how would, and the chairs were asking, well, how do you get promoted? And I mouthed off and said, well, it's all about packaging it right. And so Jeff organized a session the next year at the Joint Statistical Meeting, and the title of the session was called The Statistical Identity Crisis. Are we all data scientists now? And they had a bunch of really young, hip people and me, and I was like the establishment figure to talk about this. And as I was putting together the talk, I thought, surely someone's written about this before, and so I Google data science, promotion and tenure, and I get a hit, and it's at the American Statistical Association, amstat.org, and I thought, oh, maybe they had like a newsletter article. This is going to be really helpful, and I'm going to be at their meeting, so it'd be good to have, and so I click on it, and it's the abstract to my own talk. And it's sort of this time travel thing of, I wish I knew what I was going to say, because apparently it's really relevant. Google said so. So it's sort of a big data loop. But so I presented this. I got a lot of feedback. I didn't get any physical hugs, but I had a lot of assistant professors rush up to me and say, somebody gets this, and will you write a letter for me when I get promoted? So it's a dangerous talk to give, because now you get asked by every person who's out of the box, write a letter for my promotion, which I feel honor-bound that you really need to do, because it's part of being a senior person. But let's see. The outline I want to talk about is getting promoted when you're out of the box. The main evidence you have in your dossier, and this just isn't about tenure. I've sort of put it in the tenure track setting, but research track promotion would be the same thing. It's the same kind of evidence. If you were a senior research staff member doing this, you'd still have to put together the same kind of information. Typically, you have research activities, teaching activities, and service activities. And that's the three-legged stool, and that's what you're evaluated on. Now, I want to talk about the data science research. What's different about this from what people are usually seeing, and how do you document it? And data science teaching, what's different, how do you document it and bring it all together? So the challenge of leading the way, now Michael Johns was here this morning, and he has this quote about, you don't want to be on the cutting edge, you want to be on the penetrating point of the cutting edge. And everyone goes, yeah, it sounds really good, but that means no one else knows what you're doing. Especially if you're like this new vanguard, and everyone else in your department is established and successful the way things used to be, and you're trying to change the way things used to be. So how do you get someone to recognize that? So if you're out of the box, can you count on the people in the box to evaluate you fairly and really get what you're doing? So here's the context. So there's a Peanuts cartoon of like security's warm socks. Now Hadley Wickham is the data scientist who did the tidyverse and all this stuff. And as I was writing this paper and we were on GitHub with stuff, he sent this comment. He goes, academics like warm feet, but they don't care who makes their socks. So the basic point, which it is a lot funnier if I kind of explain it. So as I tell my children, I'm training my 18 to 21-year-old children that a joke you have to explain is a failed joke. So you have to set it up so that they like to see when I don't get it right. Basically, it's like there's a lot of work to make some socks. There's a lot of work to write a package like anything in the tidyverse. But it's not a peer-reviewed publication, so it doesn't count to people. So what he's saying is we do a lot of work in data science that makes all the traditional stuff go, but we don't get credit for it. So I thought it was very wise. The referee on the paper said, I'm not enamored of the socks quote, as enamored of the socks quote as you are, but I'm going to leave it in. I do have to adjust what they refer to as a jarring change in capitalization, but well, I'll take care of that. So there's three audiences to this. One are the junior faculty or junior professionals seeking promotion. You're the cool data scientist who wants to be appreciated for this. And the second one is the senior faculty who are the old guard who have to evaluate these young people who are doing things differently than you, and you want to be open-minded and recognize this. And then the department chairs like myself who want to promote this, and my goal on a promotion is a slam dunk. I want unanimous vote. I want like the evidence to be so overwhelming. I want it to be easy. So how do you put it together to make your case when it doesn't look like the usual stuff? So there's three strategies. There's two extremes, neither of which I think are overly effective. There's the iconoclastic of damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. I'm just going to do what I want, and I'm going to be so good at it, you're just going to have to promote me. I would say that's a little risky. Some people do pull it off, but if you're so far out there and it challenges people who are really good at the establishment, that's probably not your wisest move. The other one's the conservative of, well, I'll follow the current standards until I get promoted, and then I'll break free and do the stuff I really want to do. Well, that's not particularly satisfying, and it requires you to do a lot of stuff you're not all that interested in. So we want to talk about, the things I'm going to talk about today are trying to be strategic. You want to push the boundaries, you want to network your strengths in your disciplinary home, and you want to build consensus. You want to kind of convince people along the way that what you're doing is really cool and promotable. So there's a pre-Copernican administratosphere of going through promotion in universities. So you have the promotion candidate starts here, and then you get evaluated at your department level, and then your chair does it, and then the promotion and tenure committee, and then it goes through a dean's office, and an advisory committee is the president and the trustees, and then you get up here to heaven, which is where you're promoted. I just bring this step up because everyone thinks of their peers in their own field. I want to be a good biostatistician, so I have to impress other biostatisticians. But there's 5 layers after that, and it has to hold together. And part of your department chair's job is to sell it, to push it through the rest. So the key steps for the person getting promoted and the people promoting is you need to know the rules. What evidence do you have to turn in? This is where I'm saying the iconoclastic one I think is a little too risky. You do want to think about who's going to be evaluating, because who are you trying to impress? There's your colleagues in your department, there's people in your field outside who are writing letters of support for you, and then there's other people, in our case, the School of Public Health, for instance, and then moving on up. It's getting further away from you, so there has to be kind of a consensus of accomplishment as it moves up. We need to be aware of what the documentation is required, what's expected, a bunch of papers, what do they want to see. And there's also the what's allowed, because I'll add extra letters of support. There may be a minimum number, but Emory doesn't have a rule for maximum. I mean, you don't want to put 50 letters in there and overwhelm them. But some schools are very specific, 3 and only 3 letters, or 6 and only 6 letters. But you need to know the rules. And then I think if you don't remember anything else about what I'm going to say, you should be talking about people during your interview about promotion, just to find out how it works here. Talk to the people who just got promoted. Talk to the people who represent you on a promotion and tenure committee. Talk to your department chair. Talk to other senior faculty who are going to be voting on you. So you got to get that input so you get some feedback on how they think about it. One documentation, now, so I'm old enough that I think a 1990 publication is still pretty recent, which I know is not true. But Ernest Boyer wrote this paper called Scholarship Reconsidered, and you see it referenced in Chronicle of Higher Education, and deans and presidents and provosts. They all get this. They buy into it. We want to encourage this. And what he pointed out was it's not just about scholarship of discovery in your field. It's not just about me writing another biostatistics paper to get promoted. He said there's other kinds of scholarship. Now, this was 27 years ago, and everyone was going, yeah, we're way into this, but it's still a fight. I think all of us who work on promotion package, you have to fight. There's the standard stuff of being the best person in your field as measured by what your field has currently looks like and has looked like for years. That's usually the scholarship of discovery. I'm doing new stuff in computer science. I'm doing new stuff in biostatistics, whatever department I'm in. Now, there's also a scholarship of integration, and I like this a lot because this is what I try to do. I take, here's a computer science idea applied in this area. Can I apply it to some other area? So I integrate problems and solutions across. I don't want to just write the next paper in a linear sequence of ideas. I want to take an idea from criminology and apply it to epidemiology. There's some novelty to that, and it doesn't always fit, so you have to customize it. So it's integrating concepts across broad fields, not just pushing the envelope one step further. There's also scholarship of application, or also scholarship of engagement, of taking ideas, maybe theoretical ideas that one of my colleagues would call hopefully applied. I think I've solved a problem you might care about, and really doing it. And we saw all these applications today were very complex to actually move from an idea of, if you think about big data symposia 5 or 6 years ago, we'd have somebody who was sort of doing something on electronic health records, and then someone doing something on Facebook, and someone doing something in health, and we'll probably be able to put all this together. But now what you're seeing is we're doing things. We're not doing the one big thing they were sort of putting out there as this is what it's going to look like, but it's it's moving along. And there's also the scholarship of teaching and learning, and this is actual scholarship about how people learn things, how you should teach it. And as you can see, the courses of the training we were talking about in the last three presentations. How do we know this is working? What skills are we trying to pass on? So I'll come back to that in a minute. So like I said, the higher levels of the administratosphere really like this concept, because we, as a university, we should be celebrating and recognizing accomplishments across all of these. Now, I'm not naive enough to say that they're all equally weighted. Scholarship of discovery still carries a lot of weight, especially for people who've been very, very successful in it. I made it this way, everyone else should make it this way. But these other ones, there's a lot of discussion. You can, if you get a copy of this book, which is on Amazon, or you just look at it in Wikipedia, you'll see lots and lots of discussion and comments. Now, the main source of evidence in going forward in promotion is your dossier, which includes 3 key components. Now, this is more on the research track, tenure track, promotion level. The first one is a personal statement kind of describing your accomplishments, goals, vision in research, teaching, and service. It may be 3 different statements or all put together. The second one is a detailed curriculum vitae highlighting your accomplishments in each of those areas again. And the third one will generally be external letters from experts in your field who don't really know you. They haven't worked with you before, but they're evaluating your accomplishments. Would you get promoted at their school? What would you recommend them getting promoted? Now, the personal statement, some of the roles of it are to tell your story and put your work in context, but probably the 2 most important things I've bolded. You want to highlight what you've done, and you want to show where you're going. What we want to see when going for promotion is a person's on a trajectory. They have accomplished things so far. It may have taken a while, or it may have done something, but what are you doing next? Because we're promoting you for your future success, although the data is all based on the past. But that's kind of the way the discussion goes. Now, the CV, the typical measures of success that people look for in research success is peer-reviewed publication and competitive grant funding. Have you been funded? Are you publishing your work? Those are sort of the standard academic yardsticks. Teaching success, we want to see that you've been teaching courses. We want to see you get good evaluations. We want to see your evaluations are getting better over time, not worse. We want to see you've put together new types of courses. And then in the Boyer Scholarship of Discovery, you may actually be experimenting. You may have randomized your lab sections to try evidence-based or project-based, or you're kind of into it, and that's the kind of thing. Do you get teaching awards? Those are the kind of things you look for in a CV. And then service success, having strong collaborations, and then work with like professional organizations, refereeing, being on editorial boards, organizing committees, National Academy committees, these sorts of things that people are recognizing your skill set and your knowledge and using that in other areas. The letters of support, you get these external letters, and we all know letters of reference are supposed to be good letters about you. The key for these, they're supposed to be arm's length. They know you really well, but not so well that they've ever worked with you. So there's kind of a narrow group of people to choose from. They should understand the area you typically work in. And so this is where I said I'm probably going to get more invitations to write about data science people, because they're going to see that I wrote down that I thought this was important. So as a department chair, I'm not going to invite somebody who's traditionally given these talks about it's a waste of time to promote someone on this, because I already know what their opinion is. But you want to get somebody who can comment on this and values the actual contributions of the individual. Also, as you move up those layers in the stratosphere here, close by, when I'm talking to other biostatisticians, what's in the letter is important. I understand the letter content happens. They need to sound like they're in favor of it and they get what you do and they appreciate it. As you move higher up, they know less about your field, so if someone wrote something specifically about the kind of statistics I do, that's not going to help when it's being evaluated at a more interdisciplinary level higher up in the university. But there the letter writer matters. If they have a named professorship and they're a senior investigator, that's really important, because, it looks like this is an established person who really knows what they're talking about, and they write a paragraph at the beginning about I've had 25 years of experience in this area. They want to see that you are competent to review this person. And at the highest level, I'd say they're reviewing things, but the letterhead starts to take on a particular role. Is this coming from a peer institution? So if I'm going up for promotion at Emory and all my letters are from tiny little community college professors, they're going to wonder, is this really a comparable review? I don't think that's fair. It really shouldn't matter, but it does. If the content is not something people can understand, they start looking at the pedigree. And that's, I am being pretty facetious here and a little jaded, but I think that does happen. There's 3 components to those letters. You want to ask good people who understand what they're doing, you want someone who can talk knowledgeably about it, and you want them from an institution that people throughout your institution will respect. Now, the evidence for research success, I mentioned peer-reviewed, citable publications. We're often interested in high-impact journals, or is this paper getting referenced a lot? Authorship and order matter in biostatistics and in data science. You do a lot of collaborative work. The data scientist may not be the first or last or senior author on this, but you're going to be in a lot of things. But you need to show something that's your contribution. And then the journal quality matters. This probably matters more at those initial stages where there are other people in your field who say, oh, that's a good journal or not. And then that's not as universally acknowledged as you move up. There's also things that data scientists do, like they have blogs, they post on social media, they do a lot of other stuff. There's not a lot of people with a CV with a blog section. But I can think of some really influential data science blogs. Simply Stats does one out of Johns Hopkins. Andrew Gelman's statistics blog. A lot of people read this. A lot of people cite it. They'll take the citations off of it. So the real question is, are you having an impact? So there's not a citation index for blogs. Can you show that you did? I think one thing that's important is if somebody's really well known for their thoughtfulness, like Hadley Wickham's stuff on developing Tidyverse and all the posting and writing he does about data science, is would letter writers notice this? Because as a department chair, I would be willing to ask someone to write a letter if they'd say, oh, this candidate contributes to this field in a very unique and interesting way. If it shows up in the letters, I think that's going to help a lot more than just having it listed in your CV. And then you're thinking in the back of your mind, is what I'm spending my time on going to impress the reviewers? So Jeff Leake at Hopkins does the Simply Stats blog, and people ask him, are you going to get credit for that? And he basically sort of said he didn't care because he liked doing it anyway. But I think that was probably mentioned in the letters that supported him. Now, a point that was raised a couple times today, and Duncan Temple Lang points this out, data preparation is a lot of what a data scientist does. You are putting together a lot of complicated different types of data from other reports, and that's your contribution to science. So some of the things that a data scientist does in their career, their real contribution is software and data, and that's not a traditional part of the academic CV. So let's think about those. One of the things that's important in terms of this being scientific contribution is whether someone's using it and how they're documenting that they use it. So citation for publications counts a lot. This has been cited a lot of times. And reviewers are used to looking at citation indices and things for publications, but they're not familiar about thinking that for data and software. So the first step, well, the strategy for putting it in your CV, I would say, is to try to link the software and data to the motivating publications. Now, this is a little controversial. So in the refereeing for the paper I wrote up on this material that's almost done again is one of the referees is a data scientist, I assume, because their comment was, I hate this. Why do I have to publish it? I did all this work. I think it's good. It's out there. Why should I publish it? You mean I have to write a paper too? And my putting it between iconoclastic and conservative is strategic. I think it's important to show that you did write software, you did contribute the data to this JAMA publication. You may be the 15th author out of 45 authors, but if you can put a comment underneath that in your CV and say, I'm the one who put all the data set together, or I was part of the team that put the data set together, and they'll say, oh, this is a high-impact publication. You had a key role in it. It wouldn't have happened without you. That doesn't mean you're the first author or the last author, but it points that out. You should mention your contribution to data development in your personal statement. I spent a good deal of time. I created the Mimic3 data set, or I was part of the team that did that. That's a huge contribution to a lot of publications, even if you're not the author on them. They wouldn't have happened without your work. Having a separate section of your CV that says software, I think, is sort of the weakest way to do that, at least if you're not in a discipline that traditionally focuses on software development. Just because I can write an R package. It might not be any good and no one ever uses it. I can just list it. And so my reviewers aren't used to looking for that. They go, okay, publications, grants, flip, 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 and they go past it. So linking it into the parts I know they're reading, I think, is particularly helpful. And if you had a paper where you wrote 2 or 3 R packages and they were with that one, you could say this has been downloaded 47 times or 4,700 times. That's good to say. So there are places to publish your software. I think this is a little more old-fashioned than what's going on now, like Journal of Statistical Software is one. Let's say your software works and people are using it. This was the response I got. Do I have to write a paper? And parentally I said, probably, yeah. You do have to drive with your driver's license every time. Does putting on a GitHub count? Well, putting on GitHub often gets it used a lot. You can also track who's using it. They can version it. They know what version they're using. Should I say how many times it was downloaded? Is that like citation for a journal article? The analogy I heard was citations or downloads are like the number of people that found your paper, but we don't know how many really read it. So citations mean they read enough of it to say that it was important to what they were doing next. So it's a little bit different. Software is dynamic. We've heard a lot about pipelines today. People have updated their package that are all pasted together and all the different things they do. And for reproducible research, you really need to have versioning on this, because if you put out a version 2 years ago and someone wants to reproduce your results and now you have a new version, they can't run the new version and get exactly the same. So things like GitHub, I think, are critically important to maintaining data science, particularly because it allows you to track the versions and use the old one if I want to check how the performance of someone's old method in my proposed new one. So these are moving targets in terms of citing software and citing data, but there's been some recent developments over the last 5 or 6 years. I do point out the NIH BioSketch instructions, which we don't all read every time, do list data and research materials as scientific research products, so those can be listed in your BioSketch. Software or netware, I don't know if anyone uses the word netware anymore, but it's old enough to be in the instructions. So these are things to put in your BioSketch. Don't let someone tell you, oh, that doesn't belong there, because it does. The NSF, National Science Foundation, had a workshop on software and data citation. How should we cite these things other than just listing downloads or putting it on your own web page and writing some netware to track it? One of the action items that came out of this report was the research community needs to develop a primary, consistent data and software citation record format. We need to have a way to cite these things just like we cite publications. Journals and professional societies need to take a more active role in curating citation style files. So there's not a standard way to do this, which means there's not pressure for people to do it. Some are conscientious about it. If you have original software, there are now ways to start publishing software that's more citable. One of the publishing houses, Elsevier, has a partnership with GitHub, and they have a new academic content class called Original Software Publication, which has a disclaimer that says it's as is and it's owned by the developers. You're not transferring copyright, but they do have some restrictions on ways what license it should be released under. Now, of course, not everybody does this, so it's a way to do it, but it's still, the community's still learning how. Similar, you should think of data as a research product and think of data as a publication. So data dissemination plan is part of every research project that's funded. Sometimes people use just boilerplate things. We'll make the data available on our website, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot more tools for doing that now. So particularly genetics is kind of way ahead of this. Imaging is too, for having some of these public repositories. You might have the details on all the work you did for the data is in the supplementary material, which no one reads. Although if any of you have read any of the Global Burden of Disease publications, they have like 200-page supplemental material sections, which as a referee of them, it drives me nuts. I have to read 200 pages, because I am going to read that supplemental information. This is my pet peeve, that if the supplemental information looks like a first draft Word file, they're going to hear from me. It's kind of a crusade against nothing, but my God, I have principles. I think it's when I started getting refereeing for Nature and Science, and all the statistical details are in supplemental information. That's the part I want to read. So anyway, get off my soapbox. The data commons was mentioned earlier. That is a development that we need to keep an eye on because it is an environment where we are going to see things happen, and I think it's going to help take care of this, but these are issues that are related. Citing data is something that's not common practice, but I think every one of us should do that and should recommend it to our colleagues. There are various ways to do that. DataCite is one place. The Research Data Alliance had a workshop. American Geophysical Union, which I don't belong to, but you can imagine I found this on a Google search. And there was also a joint declaration of data citation principles, which sounds pretty serious, but I spelled principles wrong. So, also, one of the comments pointed out that at the end it goes, these key issues will be listed. First of all, they have a recommendation, don't list URLs as a way to cite your data because URLs change. But then they said you should always reference our data citation principles by the following URL. So they broke their own rules. Two more specific ones, Dryad and then scientific data, are actual ways to publish your data and get a DOI, a digital object identifier, which is the way we track publications. Well, now if I have a DOI for it, I can put it in my CV and it looks just right. So Dryad, you put an abstract, a README type file, and the data in a zip file, so you can post it. It's citable. There's a DOI for people to cite it. Scientific data is kind of an experiment over several years from the Nature Publishing Group to publish something called a data descriptor. Here's a paper about how I put my data set together, and it has all the steps. It's peer-reviewed, and it's connected to your data set. So I was asked to be on the editorial board for this, and they sent me these beautiful examples of these really complicated write-ups using geographic information systems. I said, I don't really want to be a part of this. And then I found out those were the really good ones. And I got some others that were just like, I have an FTP site with 8,700 map files. So I've learned to reject those. But it's an online journal associated with Nature Publishing Group, or run by that. Peer-reviewed content on how the data set was constructed. It has a narrative written part and the data. And both of these give you these DOIs for the data sets. And this is what a citation looks like. If you're using Dryad, you say, when using this data, please include this in your reference list. And it has the DOI for the data set. And this is the DOI for the paper the data originally came from. Here's the DOI for the data set itself. Scientific data, similarly, will have the original paper. It'll have the scientific data part. It'll have the author contributions. And it looks like these don't add up to 100%. Another pet peeve of mine. I should have refereed that. Yeah, if you ever get a referee report that says these things don't add up, I probably did it because I'll check. But the data citation says, oh, here's our data set and here's the DOI for it. So if you're an assistant professor trying to get peer-reviewed publications, every time there's 3 DOIs right there for one project, right? You've got the original paper, you've got the data descriptor, and you've got the data set itself. It's like 3 times as many publications if we do this. So I'm not saying we're cheating, just saying this is an accurate representation of your contribution to the data community. Okay. So that was a lot about data, mostly focusing on trying to get the products of data science recognized and this type of scholarship of integration. So teaching data science, we've had some discussion about who are the students, what are they going to know, and we've seen different groups. You might have the subject matter knowledge learning some data science. You might have some computer science learning more of the application into a certain area. And then what do they need to know? And we saw some discussion of what skills are needed to learn and what are the core concepts. Because there's several data science master's programs, but there's not a lot of consensus on everything should look the same, and they don't. So it's a very dynamic developing. National Academies had a workshop report on training students to extract value from big data. It has some really nice discussion in that. And the workshop included some people who want to hire data scientists listing what they want them to know how to do. There's also different parts of teaching associated with data science, and you may not think much of these, but these happen a lot. So there's the MOOCs, or the Coursera certificate in data science that Hopkins does out of biostatistics has been very influential. But there's also some, just free courses people take, and they might not spend a lot of time on it. There are boot camps, a lot of boot camps on data science with coding principles, set baseline for training. These are all things that should be listed if you're going up for promotion. There are even activities like hackathons or weekend data analytic challenges. There was a hackathon series in health data that switched to analytic challenges because they were using VA data, I believe, and having a VA hackathon you didn't want that to be found a lot. It sounds like come break into our data set. So these are hackathons in terms of programming challenges. They're often run by consulting companies as sort of a pre-internship. You want to find out who's willing to stay up all weekend and code and not get paid. And do a good job. So congratulations, you won. We're going to hire you, not pay you very much, and you're going to work really hard. So these can be used for evil as well as good. They do develop teamwork. They talk about focus. They do sort of short-term results. The question is, are you learning important skills there outside of some of the immediate? There's some people with very popular YouTube channels on coding issues. You know, it's a 5-minute thing on here's how you do this in R. And if you do that, you should get credit for it. I think it's a way of trying to package it for your review committees. So the challenge is documenting this, teaching as well. Let's say you have those YouTube things. There's people who started watching it and it counts as watches, or how many people downloaded it, how many completed the whole series if it's a MOOC. It's the same issue as downloads versus citation, trying to accurately account for your impact from this. That's what the promotion group wants to see. It's important to find letter writers, again, if you're a department chair, who can recognize these as contributions and actually call them out. And for the junior faculty member or the person thinking of getting promoted, you want to be aware of, anticipate, and preempt preconceptions of voting faculty. If someone walks around going, I think MOOCs are the worst thing ever, then probably saying, I'm going to do all my teaching in MOOCs is not your best strategy. You should say, oh, really, why? I wonder why that is. And then you find out, oh, because people sign up and they never finish it. So now you're thinking, if I'm going to do a MOOC, I need to know who finished. I need to encourage people to finish and think about that. You also want to think about the faculty members who will be reviewing you and voting you, and the higher level administrators. It's all about, getting credit for what you're doing. So the key ideas here: one, know the rules, like what evidence you need to put through. I gave a very generic version of this, but there's specific versions within schools and different universities. Know what counts as evidence and by whom. Working interdisciplinary is like traveling internationally. The money changes when you work with different people. So what journals are cool? What kind of things to do? Even publishing. In the computer science field, peer-reviewed conference proceedings are ranked very highly. If I do that in biostatistics, they'll think, most of our conferences aren't peer-reviewed. Why are these proceedings here? It should be a peer, so who's looking at it is going to look at it differently. You need to develop confidence and recognize your own research and teaching productivity. It's sort of your elevator talk or expanded. What I do is exciting because I'm doing this, this, and this. It's having this kind of impact. You want to provide context for your scholarly achievements. If you put all your eggs in the scholarship of integration basket, talk it up. Say, this is Boyer's Scholarship Reconsidered. You really opened the door for interdisciplinary work like mine. Think about citations. If there's a way to get a DOI for something, that's your friend. That's a good thing to do. Talk to your chair early and often. Your chair may change while you're in the period of getting promoted. Talk to the next chair. Talk to your voting faculty early and often. Not just tell them what you're doing, but listen to them in terms of how they evaluate these things. You may not change their mind the time you're talking to them, but after they've heard it from you over and over and over again, sometimes that can make a big difference. Or they might see someone else doing it and they realize, oh, that is pretty interesting. And so you want to keep the discussion on the table. And that's where I'll end. So thank you for being here all day. If you have comments or questions, or you need me to write you a letter, get in line. This paper will appear in the American Statistician at some point in the next 12 months, I suppose. It'll probably be online. But if you're interested, I'd be happy to give you a copy.
So any questions for the esteemed Dr. Waller?
Yeah.
Just a comment. You can get DOIs for software.
Yeah. So yeah, I didn't exactly say that, but you can get DOIs for software too. So these kind of things that allow people to say, I used your work, and here is the work you used, and the DOI will link to the version. The DOI will update with it. So yeah, that's
right.
good.
And, if you need to know exactly how to do it, if you just Google up GitHub and DOI,
Right.
It'll walk you through step by step on how to get DOIs.
Yeah. So that's a good point.
What?
I don't know if the H-index counts it yet. Almost.
Little scholar doesn't.
We've had discussions with Thomson Reuters. So the data site and the cross site. So there are two top-level boards that manage DOIs. one that does journals, the other that does data and software. They are working together to make sure each can see the other. Once that happens, then shows up in everything.
Yeah.
But until then, Nature Scientific Data looks good. FOSS one, there are actually more than
Yeah,
a handful of top tier places that have mechanisms to publish data. Nature Scientific Data was the first one.
So I have some very, very short closing remarks. Again, we pitched this as a series. We don't have the series planned yet, but let me throw out some ideas. Some of these people don't even know. So for example, we were thinking a gene by environment one that our P30 could sponsor. Winship could do one on cancer. Alan Levy said he would do one on brain health and imaging. CFAR in the Vaccine Center could do an infection and immunity one. Social determinants of health by behavioral sciences and health education. And Gary Clifford could do one on M-Health. So we have like the next couple of years lined up. We can do this every semester. I think we really kind of need this to foster this energy around data sciences at Emory, not just in the health sciences, but beyond, across everything being done on campus. So thank you for attending, and I hope to see you at future events.
And if you have ideas, email Gary or Gary, anybody named Gary at Emory, you can email. But we hope to have the Think Big showing up again and again. So thanks for staying with us all day. If you do schedule one, don't have to run past 4 o'clock. Screen goes up and the lights go out.